All right, this is going to be part 2, chapter 1. You see here that the first PowerPoint note is on bureaucracies. Now, I'm not going to get into the specifics of this here. Take a look at that, make sure on your own. But let me say on this question of bureaucracies that the criminal justice system is very, very bureaucratic. There's a lot of paper pushing. Everything is very formalized. Every T has to be crossed and I dotted, and there's historical reasons for that. The institution of the military, which goes back thousands of years, developed into a very bureaucratic sort of institution. If you've ever served in the military, you know what I'm talking about. And the criminal justice institutions, like policing, for example, have tended to imitate the military and to do a lot of the same sorts of things like uniforms and hierarchies and chains of command and lots of paperwork and following policies and rules, all that kind of stuff. The criminal justice system does that very much, and they've evolved even more of that over the years. So it is a very, form-filling, form completing. There's a lot of paperwork if you get a job in the criminal justice system. That's kind of one thing that probably quite a few people would complain about, is they have to write a lot of reports and fill out a lot of paper forms, that kind of thing. But that's just the way it is, and it's done to professionalize. We talked about professionalization before. It's done to handle lots of calls, lots of cases that are being processed. In a huge system, you need to have organization, and you need to have clear lines drawn and policies laid down, and so that your organization sort of works like a machine, like a smooth running system. So that's one thing. If I'm assuming that most of you folks are going to be heading into criminal justice jobs in the future, well, that's one thing you'll have to get used to, is that they tend to be very, very bureaucratic. Again, study the chapter and the notes here on what we mean by the details of that. One thing that I will say is that you want to understand this about any institution, say the university, for example, the place where you work, the church that you might attend, that institutions tend to naturally want to grow, to survive, to thrive, or to at least maintain the status quo where they're doing fine. And if you really want to understand an institution, it's trying to preserve itself and to grow, at the very least to preserve itself, but to grow and expand and to keep moving into more and more direction. So that's just a nature, that's just a deep tendency of bureaucracies. Again, I'm not going to cover all the points made here. You should make sure and do that on your own in preparation for quizzes. We also, I've got listed here something from the textbook on culture. And, I won't stop here and talk too much about that. Just when you use this term culture, just think of it as that an organization or a society has a certain way of doing things that could be different than another society or another different organization. The style of how you do things, what your most central values are, your priorities, that differs from one group to the next. And so your unique set of values and priorities and ways of doing things, that's your culture. And that's a good, useful tool to help you understand different branches of the criminal justice system, as they all have a certain kind of culture. If you go join a police department, they're going to have a certain way of doing things, and it's going to be a different experience than having another job at a different sort of with a different sort of organization. So I'll just leave it there. But again, make sure that it's always important to be familiar with what we mean when we use these terms, because I test those heavily, and it's good to have a sense of these terms that get thrown around a lot and what they mean. We already talked about how criminal justice organizations often have conflicting, competing philosophies and goals, and they don't always get along with each other because they're attempting to achieve different things sometimes. So I'll move on from that. This issue of morality, deviance. Let me just say here that, and this will come up here in a couple of highlighted points down the road here, is that within criminology, there's different disciplines. Criminology is a multidisciplinary. You've got, yes, this is a sociology course, but we're influenced a lot by other disciplines like psychology, political science, biology, the neurosciences, for example, brain studies, that kind of thing, even history and anthropology. It's really a discipline that is influenced by a lot of different disciplines. And so each one of these disciplines has its own way of looking at things. And a sociologist's point of view is to tend to look at things in terms of deviance, because by deviance we tend to refer to behavior that is disapproved of by the mainstream, by the majority, by the powers that be, the influential people in society, the elites. If you do something, engage in a behavior that powerful people don't like, well, it's likely to be labeled deviant. That's the sociologist sort of looks at the social aspect of bad behavior, and so we have a tendency to use the term deviance. But let me move to the next slide here, and we'll get back to this. Well, maybe I'll say it now, just since I'm on the topic, that we also use this word crime. That gets thrown around a lot. Criminology, of course, has the root word of crime in it. And by crime, we don't mean breaking the rules against what the majority, likes or values or thinks is proper. But rather, crime is a violation behavior that violates criminal law. So that's a legal term. That comes from legal studies, from the study of the law. And so we'll use that term a lot. Again, we're influenced a lot by legal studies. But realize that there are differences here, and that each discipline has its own way of looking at things. So the lawyer is going to look at a crime through a legal lens, the sociologist through a sociological lens, social lens. And for example, just to throw another one out there, the psychologist tends to look at it differently too. A big area of study in psychology is aggression, which means to intentionally try to hurt somebody else. And that's their own focus, which is different than crime and different than deviance, but they're overlapping, right? So we'll talk about aggression too in this class and other courses, or if you take a psychology course. So just realize that there's somewhat different ways of looking at these things because each discipline contributes its own thing. And one thing that's important to me is that you realize that there isn't one discipline that has a corner on the truth. Everybody has something to contribute. And even though I'm trained in sociology, I don't dismiss these other disciplines or downplay them at all, because they're all very important and have something to say. Again, a point here that the textbook is making is that there's a lot of in American society. We're a very diverse society, getting more diverse each day, and people disagree on a lot of these criminal justice issues, the proper way to do things, what justice is all about, what the policy should be about different kinds of behavior, what should be criminal, what should be tolerated. And so, hey, that's just the nature of the beast, and we'll get into some of those issues a little bit in this class. This really isn't an issues class exactly, but issues, I think, is a very interesting and important part of our discipline to understand the different perspectives that people take. And I would hope that people would learn all sides of issues in debate so that they can be well informed when they decide how could they come down on these issues. So anyway, again, take a look at these notes, because I'm skipping some and only hitting certain things that I really want to stress. Now, this next one I do think is worth stressing, that for much of American history, there was no criminal justice education in the United States. So I've mentioned this a little bit in the last lecture, that a police officer 100 years ago, say in New York City, probably got the job with no experience, no training, no academy, nothing. No, didn't major in criminal justice. There was no such thing back then. You just got the job, and maybe you were very young, and you were trained on the job. And so you started with zero knowledge, or just what you'd picked up from the streets growing up or something. Well, that began to change gradually, and the a real force for change on this came from police chiefs around the country starting in the 1920s. You had two famous police chiefs, August Vollmer out of Berkeley, California, and also Orlando Wilson from Wichita. They started to, along with being police chiefs, started teaching college courses about policing issues and criminal justice issues. And so that was sort of the beginning of recognizing that, hey, we need to educate people who are going to go into these fields and who have an interest in these subjects, and to take a scholarly academic approach and add to the street approach to learn things from the street. Let's turn it into something academic, and so you begin to see a move in that direction. Close to a century ago. But even though it was started a long time ago, it didn't really take off until probably the 1970s. Criminal justice courses and programs and degrees. They grew in the 50s and 60s, but they didn't really become something common until 1970s, especially starting in the early 1970s. You saw the growth of junior colleges, community colleges all around the country, and those have been a major place where people become educated about criminal justice type of issues is at community colleges. Yes, you've got programs at the bachelor's degree level and all the way up to the PhD level now. There's quite a few. I don't know the exact number, but probably at least 20 PhD programs where you can get a PhD in criminology or criminal justice, and so it really has grown, but that's just been the past 40 or 50 years that we've seen a lot of growth where it's become commonplace, and that nowadays there's sort of an expectation that you're going to get a few years of college in before you go join the workforce and get a job in the criminal justice system. So in the early days, most courses were vocational. What we mean by vocational was, I think, a community college course would be typical here, where you learn hands-on stuff. You learn maybe criminal law with the purpose of being able to act as a police officer and know how to act legally and constitutionally when you're interacting with citizens. And so, it was more hands-on. You would also learn, how to fire a weapon or handle a weapon properly, or self-defense, control tactics, physical control tactics, that kind of thing, et cetera, et cetera. Had crowd traffic control, that kind of stuff, hands-on sorts of things. That is more traditional. It's been in recent decades where we've gone into more of an academic approach, which is what you folks are experiencing now. Here at ISU, where we look at theory and research and data and take kind of a scientific academic point of view to things, which is less practical, more removed. But again, that's what tends to happen as a discipline professionalizes. It gets more theoretical and academic and that kind of stuff. And frankly, you'll learn all the practical stuff when you get the job and you go through the academy or whatever type of training that you get. That's where you get the hands-on stuff. Here at the university, we're big picture academic, dealing with all these issues that are less practical but are more big picture. A lot of what's going on at the university is we're trying to get you to think like managers and leaders and supervisors, to be able to see the big picture and to have the sort of knowledge and skills and perspective to move up within your agency and to be able to see things like managers do, like the leaders do. Anyway, so grown a lot is in recent decades. Now it's a commonplace thing, and my goodness, there's so many online programs now and specialized programs. If you ever want to talk about these sorts of things, please let me know. That's one of my job responsibilities is to help people plan for careers and look for options and opportunities. So I'm glad to help. I want to stress that right here since we're talking about it. Okay, next point. I addressed before, so just to run through it quickly. While deviance refers to behavior that runs counter to society's expectations, crime is a legal term. So it's a violation of criminal law. So again, it just comes from a different discipline, but we'll use that a lot in this course because this course is not just one focusing on just one discipline, sociology. It draws very heavily from other disciplines. Let's see, we're about 15 minutes into the lecture right now, so let's stop here and then we'll pick it up on part 3.